everyone, Tara here today, and I am speaking with Geoff Straw again for our second interview. Geoff, thank you so much for meeting with me again and sharing all of your insight. Today we are talking about the transformative power of grief, which I think is a huge topic given what is currently going on in today's world and communities and with people. Geoff, do you want to just let everyone know a little bit about who you are again, just to remind the viewers of who you are, what you do and offer and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll jump in.
Sure. So I'm Geoff. Glad to be here again, and I do have a private practice in St. Catharines, Ontario. I also work for a local hospice, companioning patients and families at end of life, and also helping the families cope with the pain of loss after the death.
Okay. And so you're, again, one of the best people probably to talk to about this topic. And so I found it very interesting when you even emailed me the topic today of the transformative power of grief. So it really intrigued me to see what we could jump into with this. So the first thing is, how can you describe grief and what is it?
Sure. So that's a great question. I think grief is really our personal response to loss. So we often think of it in terms of losing a loved one to illness or death, and that certainly is the case. But I think particularly right now with COVID-19, we're realizing all of the other losses that many people are feeling, loss of connection with our colleagues or our family members that we can't see or spend time with. Some people are experiencing job loss, layoffs, and just also hearing about all of the losses, on the news every day of people who are very ill, who are in hospital. Some people are dying. So I think we're all feeling that collective sense of grief and uncertainty right now. But I would say that loss is really, it's inevitable. It's universal experience. We all experience it sooner or later if we live long enough. So it's something that comes to all of us. Loss is nothing we can escape from, and grief is really our response to loss. So I always say that your grief is as unique as your thumbprint. Nobody has the same grief experience that you will have. It's very, very unique, and there's no right or wrong way to grieve. So, but I think it's also a time when people need a lot of support. It's difficult, it's challenging to go through.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So how does grief impact us?
I think in many ways, we often think of grief as being just emotional, and certainly it is. If you're grieving, you have a lot of really intense, strong emotions. We often describe them as grief bursts. You'll be going about your day, feeling not too bad, and all of a sudden you'll just be dissolved in tears, maybe where you have a memory. Or for some people, it's more anger. Why is it happening? Regret, things that you wish you had said or done that you didn't do. So certainly emotional impact is huge, but it can also impact us physically. People often report when they're grieving that they have low energy. Aches and pains, insomnia is also very common for people that are grieving. And even our cognition can be changed, mentally. People will often report that they're not really thinking clearly. They walk into a room and they forget, why did I come in here? Where did I leave my keys? Hard to concentrate at work, that kind of thing. And the last realm is really spiritually. When you're grieving a significant loss, some people will question, the meaning and purpose of their life. Their faith may be put into question. So really, grief and loss impacts us really in a whole person sense on all levels of being human. It's very profound. And it can be very intense.
Yeah. And you saying that, actually, I was having like all these light bulb moments of things that people, friends and family and clients have been saying about the, lack of motivation or lack of concentration and low energy levels and the outbursts. I have friends who are saying, like 1 minute I'm, fine and I'm working on my side hustle and all this stuff. And then the next minute, like something happens or whatever. And I just, I either am really angry or I'm in tears. And so I think a lot of people can relate to all of those things that you've listed because I think that unfortunately in this moment we all have something to grieve, whether it's, missed events or whatever the case might be. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So why is support helpful for somebody who is grieving?
Well, I think if just listening to all the things that we're mentioning about grief, you can see how overwhelming it could be. You're doing okay one minute, you're dissolved in tears the next. You're not sleeping. Maybe your appetite is off. You're feeling disconnected. So really tough to go through all of those experiences on your own. And so support groups can be helpful. Right now, they would be virtual groups, but I think really just to know you're not alone.
Yeah.
There are other people feeling this way, and to know that all of those things are normal. I think that's
Mhm.
really important for people that are grieving, because we often question ourselves and say, what's wrong with me? Like, this
Yeah.
isn't, I don't feel myself, I'm losing it. And so support, whether it's from a group or from a mental health professional, just to be able to say, what, you're normal. This is difficult, but it is actually a typical grieving response. So don't worry too much about it. Allow yourself to go through it. So I think support can be really helpful when we're
Mhm.
going through it, to know that we're not alone and that we're normal.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's huge, right? Because I think in a time like this, because we are so isolated, it's so easy to put things back on yourself, right? Like, are other moms going crazy, or like, are other people crying about this, or whatever the case might be? And it's so easy to bring it back. Well, there must be something wrong with me, or I'm over exaggerating, or
Right.
whatever the case be, right? And to understand that, in fact, not only is it normal, but there's many of us who are going through very similar emotions.
Yes.
um okay, so this is the big question: how is grief transformational, and how can something positive come from the pain that people are experiencing?
Yes, it's a good question. And I think if you talk to people that have really experienced a significant loss, most of them will say that there have been some positive ways that their grief has changed them. I think before we can get to those positive ways, we really need to embrace the pain of grief. We really have to realize there's no band-aid approach, that we have to work through our feelings. So that's really the dark night of our grief, so to speak. We need to get support and work through all of that and accept our feelings. But eventually we kind of are in this limbo period when we're grieving, where we're not quite who we were before we had that significant loss. And we haven't quite found the new normal yet. We're kind of in this limbo of, who am I becoming? How am I changing in my grief? So I think the first way we get there is to accept that you will be changed by your grief, and that some of those changes may be positive changes. So I'd say that's the first step, is to realize that you probably never quite go back to exactly the way you were before. You really are finding a new normal. And at first, of course, we don't want to accept that.
Yeah.
We want things to go back the way they were before. We're attached to the old way, the old relationship, and that's okay for a while. But eventually we realize that the only way we can progress is to move forward. And so if you've lost a loved one, eventually you start to develop a new relationship with the person who's died, which might sound odd, but you're really converting a physical relationship to a relationship of memory, and hope. And so you really begin to realize that you have to go on with your life. And the big question is, how?
Yeah.
What's going to give my life meaning and purpose now? How can I reconstruct my life? And gradually over time, you begin to accept some of those changes. You allow grief to change you in positive ways.
Hmm. Okay. And so what would you say is, so for the people who are experiencing grief right now and who are going through this, like, what is the first steps that they can take?
So I think the first one we've sort of talked about is accept your emotions, accept the difficult aspects of grief, get support for that, and then start to be curious about the ways that you might change as you're grieving. So, for example, many people that have been through a significant loss will say that they realize more than ever when they come through it that one of the most important things in life is our relationships. So most people at end of life don't talk about regrets in terms of, well, gee, I wish I'd worked harder.
Yeah.
It's usually relationships are the most important. So some people will say that they really realize that now more than ever. So perhaps one of the ways you might change or grow is that you become less materialistic. You realize that at the end of the day, the clothes, the car, the house, all of those material things aren't really what brings you lasting meaning
Yeah.
and purpose and happiness. So perhaps investing more in relationships. I think that just the little things in life, appreciation of, some of the things that maybe we take for granted, our friendships, quality time spent with our children. I think right now with COVID-19, people are at home with their families, almost a sense of getting back to basics. And
Yeah.
we're not rushing around. And hopefully what can come out of that is really realizing all the things that we miss when we're too busy. So kind of getting back to basics. We see sometimes, I work at a hospice, and we see that loved ones who lose a friend or a family member will often decide later on down the road to volunteer. They want to give something back once they heal through their grief. They realize, I guess it opens your compassion. You realize the amount of suffering that other people are going through something similar, and there's a desire to want to help. There's a desire to want to give back, maybe in a way that you never thought of before. So
Yeah.
you can allow your loss, your grief to really touch you and open you to other people's need. And so often it involves giving back, becoming involved in your community. That can be really, really important, is helping other people,
Hmm.
which maybe before you went through your loss, you never really realized the extent of that and how important that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the questions that I have here is, what is post-traumatic growth?
So really interesting phenomenon that's getting a lot of research these days. Of course, we've heard for years about post-traumatic stress
Hmm.
syndrome, which is very real. But in positive psychology, people are starting to be curious about how do we grow through trauma? How can we not only survive trauma, but actually change in positive ways? So it's this idea that going through difficult experiences and suffering can actually produce growth in us. And so there's been a lot of research done on ways that we can grow, ways that we can change. And I think it's very interesting to think about that, because it gives people hope.
Hmm.
How can I allow my situation to perhaps open me up to more compassion for my fellow man, to maybe think about what's important now in my life that I never used to think was important. So, what are maybe some goal setting, a life review, realizing that life is short. Things
Hmm.
can change quickly overnight. So knowing that, how do I want to move forward? I think people that go through trauma, like the loss of a loved one, can also come out of it feeling that they're actually stronger than they were before. Initially, you don't feel that in the first stages of grief, but when you can survive something like that and realize that you can go on, I think that renewal really adds to a sense of, hey, I'm strong. I can get through anything. I can help other people. A sense of perhaps maybe living more in the moment,
Yeah.
knowing that our time is short. How can I learn to live in the now, which
Hmm.
is really important. The past is over, the future hasn't happened. So maybe a renewed sense of meaning in the present moment, feeling gratitude for all the wonderful things that you still have in your life.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's a huge thing that I've been hearing so many people talk about, is gratitude practice through
Hmm.
all of this. Because there's so much out of our control and so much going on for people, that it's, such a simple thing to come back to is, being grateful for what you do have right now. Um,
Exactly. So
yeah.
our losses change us, but to also keep an inventory of what do I still have in my life,
Yeah.
what's important to me, and taking that sense of gratitude for the small things in the moment, and really really focusing on that can accelerate your growth. It can change feelings of hopelessness and despair into feelings of hope and renewal. And so yes, a simple gratitude practice can be very helpful. And so I encourage my clients to do that whenever possible.
Yeah. And that's great. That is great advice. Is there anything else that you want to share with viewers before we finish off today?
I think just really give yourself the permission to be human right now in this time, whether you're grieving the loss of a loved one or just everything going on in the world. Realize that your feelings are okay, and reach out for support. Sometimes that can help to clarify where you want to go and just give a good outlet for for some of those intense emotions that we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's great. So do you want to just remind everybody how to get a hold of you if they are interested in reaching out to you for support or to work with you through anything that they're experiencing right now?
Certainly, I'm welcoming any calls or video chats right now are possible too. You can give me a call at 905-685-8605 or email at gwstraw@simpatico.ca.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me again today and doing this. I know that it's really helpful for a lot of people, and I hope that we are able to chat again soon.
Great, thank you.